Hello and welcome to this episode of the Questioning Behaviour podcast. My name is Sarah Bowen and I'm here as always with Merle van den Akker.
Hello.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying.
And today we're going to be talking about the art, the act, the
pinnacle.
the pinnacle. Online persuasion. How do you do it? How do you master it? How do you get people to click here or stay on this side a bit longer? These are all the tips and tricks that we've all been exposed to in our lives through default, if you've ever used social media or the internet in general. We have been subjects of internet persuasion, but we're going to pull back the curtain today and talk to someone who is not the mastermind. That sounds very manipulative, but talk to someone who...
He's not Jeff Bezos, don't worry.
Yes, who can tell us a little bit more.
I have an ad blocker on everything, and I still can't escape it. So this is some interesting stuff. But, given that it has become obnoxiously clear that we know very little about this, maybe let's just dive into it. Michael, just take it away, mate. Take it away. So, Michael, please tell the crowd, who are you, what do you do, and how did you get there?
Michael Barbera, the Chief Behavioral Officer at Clicksuasion Labs, where we research how people make decisions, then apply psychology to marketing, communication, and employee engagement. How I got here by accident, like most people in behavioral economics or behavioral science. We didn't grow up saying, I want to be a behavioral economist. It's not a sexy title. It's not something we achieve for. So I was an entrepreneur at the age of 13, had my first exit at 17. And although it still is a success story, during that time from 13 to 17, even though I was an entrepreneur, I had an interest, a niche, or a passion in marketing, but not really traditional advertising, more so how a customer makes a decision. As I was an entrepreneur, I would sit back and observe how customers chose one item versus another or alternative. After that exit at 17, began my academic lifestyle, and then started to stumble upon the behavioral economics
Michael,
decision science.
I need to know, during that period, 13 to 17, you still attended school, right?
Well, that's a good question. So what most people don't know, yes, I have a PhD, but I'm also a high school dropout. I left high school at the age of 14 because I was running or managing a successful business.
Is that legal?
Yes. My parents signed for me to leave. I got my GED at 17 and then went back to school and got, bachelor's, 2 masters, and a PhD.
Wowzers. It's very impressive.
I mean, I've got nothing to say, but just, please continue on this already very wild journey.
So, going back a little bit short, I'm a formerly trained and educated psychologist, but an entrepreneur by torture. There's pros and cons to each. During this time, my passion or niche, interest in behavioral economics, I stumbled upon behavioral economics in undergrad, and then kind of followed that journey.
When you were 11.
Yes. No. This is at least 16. Just kidding. This is my 20s.
Oh, great.
And during that time, I started to learn more about the science of, decision making, human judgment decision making, behavioral finance, behavioral economics, and just followed that path the rest of the way. For the last 7 years, I've been with Clicksuasion Labs since 2014. And that's where I currently am, I spend majority of even though I still am an entrepreneur today, this is where I spend most of my hours, most of my days and nights, and my passion.
Also your nights. That's not good. I guess we don't have to ask you about work-life balance then. That's just a wasted conversation.
I had a positive, a good life-work balance prior to the pandemic.
Okay.
It was quite well. And then the pandemic happened, and every person who has contacted us wants to know the answer to the same question or equation.
Sure.
When is customer A going to spend B dollar amount on C product by D date? And we can't give them the answer. However, we can find some triggers to identify and then react as appropriate.
Fantastic. I mean, so you now find yourself based at Clicksuasion, and you said something interesting that you do research within the company. What does that look like? Because I think, I mean, maybe I'm just coming from a naive perspective, but for a lot of people, when they think practitioner versus researcher, I think it's a bit of a strong divide between those who just apply insights and those who do the sort of the background research. But sounds like you guys do a bit of both. So could you tell us a bit more about what that's like? What do you actually do at Clicksuasion?
There are two teams at the lab. There's a research team and a marketing team. And so we look at it like this. If you were to go to a physician because you had a cold or a cough, you would explain your symptoms to that physician or that practitioner. They would likely give you a diagnosis and give you some recommendations based upon peer-reviewed science. You would then apply those, report back in X number of days or weeks. Then that physician would more than likely report back to academia with the results. And then there's this closed loop. It goes from practitioner to academia to research and publish back to the practitioner. That loop doesn't exist in marketing and communication. It's two different life cycles. So on the academic side, it's publish or perish in academia. We're going to publish to maintain our careers and just publish for the sake of publishing. And then you have practitioners who say, Sarah, Merle, oh my God, we got this book last week. You've got to read this book. It is amazing. But most practitioners don't understand is that book was likely designed 5 years ago from research 10 years prior. So that the author likely spent 15 or 10 years researching those variables in those studies, then got offered a book deal, and got published. And now 15 years later, practitioners are applying that research. So there's not a closed loop. So what we do is the research team conducts in-house primary research here at the lab, as well as reviews secondary research from peer-reviewed studies, combines those together for our clients, and we apply it in real time to website development, marketing, advertisement, human eye tracking, and ad engagement, et cetera. So a lot of behavioral targeting and a lot of neuroscience is applied.
Excellent.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, it is a bit scary that a lot of applications of behavioral science are using, by sort of construction, out-of-date research. But it sounds like you guys are trying to really solve that problem. So, yeah, is that an easy thing to do? It kind of sounds like perfect in practice. Why doesn't everyone do that?
Well, it's easier said than applied. So I'll give you an example. About 4 or 5 years ago, I'm at an academic conference. I'm listening to a young academic, probably just finished her PhD, got a job at a university teaching and conducting research, talking through their study. I don't recall what the study was, but I'm thinking like, yes, awesome variable, awesome outcome. Love the study. This is all awesome stuff. What they're saying would work. But then you put the business strategy hat on and say, well, look at the economic model. Is this sustainable? Is this going to work? So much money would be injected into that campaign that the yield, the return on investment, probably wouldn't sustain the investment. So although there's great research out there, not all of it can be applied. So at the lab, everything we do here, whether it be internal research or advising our clients, has to meet 3 criteria. Everything has to be 1, actionable, 2, relevant to their goals, and then 3, sustainable. Without those 3, we can't provide a recommendation to a client.
That's very fair. Well, Mike, I'm already convinced. Are you hiring PhDs?
Yes, absolutely.
Are you starting your PhD program?
Please. Over the last 3 weeks, we've had 1 new team member or employee start over the last 3 weeks. So 3 over the last 3 weeks. And then tomorrow, I know I'm probably dating myself for this podcast. So tomorrow or previously on a random Tuesday in March, we have 3 students from the University of Chicago starting as interns at the lab.
Excellent. Now, see, this is the stuff we like to hear. This is what we're here for. Excellent. So this is good.
So, I mean, the name Clicksuasion, it sounds, play off the word persuasion. Is that sort of the main goal for you guys? It's all about using behavioral science to persuade people to make certain choices. Is that how you see it? Yes,
with a little more detail to that answer. So we want organizations to apply behavioral insights to their marketing and their communication, their message framing, their digital customer experiences. But we also don't want it to be, so we talk about, there's in behavioral science, there's nudges and there's potentially coming out as sludge. We believe there's a third item in behavioral science, and that's shoving. We believe that say you're at a timeshare presentation where you're difficult to get out and there are high pressure sales tactics, or you're at a casino or IKEA and there's no windows, no doors, no clocks, and you can't really escape. Those are pretty much we call shoving.
I'm now just thinking of like IKEA, but in casino form. Like you might walk away with a calyx, but you might walk away with a cactus. It's just 50-50. You don't know. It would be great though. I'd still go. I love IKEA. It's really quite sad.
I can't tell you who the architects are that design the floor plan for IKEA, but if I had to make an assumption or hypotheses, I would assume there's some overlap or experience with casino design.
It is a bit of a labyrinth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The only thing I'm disappointed with IKEA as compared to a casino, where's the bar? Where's the cocktail bar? Come on.
That's another way to distort your perception of time. I'm sure, add alcohol, substances to the mix. But, okay, so I guess this shove, this new, offshoot of the sort of the nudge and the sludge and these sort of catchy catchphrases. Doesn't the shove, is it something like on paper, technically, you're not being forced into a decision, but everything is being structured so that it makes it very, very difficult to leave? Is that the idea that makes it not sort of the difference between writing something into law versus the sort
absolutely
of the
the shoving is adding excess barriers to being able to opt out or exit on your own. So for example, with the casino, it's not easy to find an exit. Same thing with IKEA. Or if you're at a timeshare presentation, you're typically going to be locked in an area where it's difficult for you to walk up and walk out. So although you do have the freedom and the ability to opt out or exit at any time, there's small barriers that are, let's say cognitive barriers that keep us in place. And then they combine with some physical barriers as well. Although you're not locked in a cell or behind a locked door, it's still a physical cognitive barrier that prevents you from getting out or leaving at any time. We always want a consumer or a person to have the ability to easily exit if needed. But we also don't want to put many barriers between them and the brand that the brand wants to engage with. So a good mix between what are positive ethics in marketing and persuasion, and then what is considered a shove. We want to stay away from that shoving as well, because then what happens is there's some regret, there's some remorse, and then the likeliness of that consumer returning to that brand significantly decreases over time.
So is shove just bad practice, bad ethical practice, or is there any way in which you could shove without, crossing this ethical line?
I would stay away from shoving. Shoving is difficult.
It sounds very aggressive.
Yes, it is.
And not just a bit a slight push. A shove is just full force. I'm just it's too much.
Yeah, this is Sparta much, right?
If shoving is used, more than likely the brand organization can obtain a sale, close a deal, convince the consumer to swipe their credit card or spend cash. That's likely to happen. Then the remorse likely sets in, the regret, and then the loyalty goes away. And the ability to maintain that consumer for a second purchase or a third purchase over time is less likely to happen. So even though you're likely to get that conversion right away, it's got long-term brand damage towards brand equity. We would advise keep away from shoving as best as possible. Give the customer a positive experience. When you buy your brand new cell phone and it comes in this white square box, you lift that box up, it makes a little suction noise, and in there you're like, whoo, I got this brand new toy. You're so excited, you're happy. But then you don't realize you just spent $1,000 because you're part of the experience. Forget that. Yeah, it's already gone. Ooh, my shiny new toy. Let me add my apps, talk to my friends, take some selfies, and it's more of the experience. So I dislike categorizing things in binary options. It's only these two options, but really there's two types of transactions. There's experiential, and then there's utilitarian transactions. Sure. If we were to look at most consumers over the last 30 days, most did not make a purchase that sustained life. So some people have some hospital bills or some medications, and yes, those are important to sustain life. We went grocery shopping, but we didn't need to buy that steak or that hamburger or that cheeseburger. We could have gotten a more healthier option or a lower cost option. So right. Most of our decisions
I'm thinking of the most recent thing I just bought. I was like, did I really need that 16-pack of white chocolate Kit Kats? I'm like, probably not.
But you wanted it.
I did want it.
And so we make most of our purchase decisions on want. So we want that 5-bedroom house with a pool and an awesome backyard, but we can definitely get by with a studio apartment or flat.
Especially because we can't remotely afford the former.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely not happening.
I'm thinking just in general, sort of when, I guess, talking about behavioral science insights within these categories, like the nudge, shove, sludge. What's your opinion about that type of framework? Do you find that it's helpful? Do you find that it's helpful like in your actual day-to-day practice of applying behavioral science? Or is it something that you'd more likely use, to sort of communicate different types of ideas or different types of examples?
When starting a research project or a study, using these frameworks, or at least the definitions of nudging, shoving, and sludge, is probably a good 35,000 foot start. And the reason for that is there's so many biases and variables and constructs that are not applied or fall within those definitions, yet there's still a good starting point for behavioral science, behavioral economics, human decision making. And if we can identify where we are now, where we want to be, what's the measurable objective, and how we want the consumer or the client to go through this journey, what are their touch points, then the nudging, the shoving, and the sludging is a good framework to say, all right, so if we look at the journey and at a touch point, making this up, at touch point 6, we encounter some sludge. How can we reroute the journey or revise it? And at touch point 13, we see some nudging. Is the customer in a good spot to be targeted for specific ads or engaged with? And what is the buyer decision making, the buyer persona? Every buyer has their own decision making process. We talk about the utilitarian experiential purchases. It really depends on what you're buying, and depends on how it's framed, where it's positioned. If we were selling wine, and if I said there's 2 bottles of wine on the shelf, one costs $9, the other one costs $19. If I was to say there's 9 and 19, which one would you buy for yourself? More than likely, you're going to say the $9. But if I say, which one are you going to buy to take to a friend's house for dinner? Same product, same brand. The question is framed differently. More than likely, you're going to buy the friend's the friend. Hopefully, you buy me the $19 bottle of wine. But most people would choose the more expensive bottle to avoid looking like a bad friend or a cheap friend. But then if we add a third bottle and you have 9, 19, and 99, in that cognitive micro moment, we process 99 is ridiculous, not going to buy it, too expensive, don't need it. But in that cognitive micro moment, the $19 bottle of wine looks reasonable. So therefore, question number 1, which bottle would you buy for yourself? We're more than likely to choose the $19 bottle of wine because anchoring and using the decoy as the $99 bottle of wine. The 19 looks more reasonable and affordable.
Nice.
So I feel like just in the very examples that we've gone through, and we've within the short time that we've been recording, we've gone through some serious examples already. I feel like my perspective is, and given that you know so much about marketing yourself, is so we have shoving and we have budging and sludging and boosting and nudging. After a while, I'm just wondering, like, can you, given the fact that you know much more about marketing, can you still see the trees through the damn forest, or the forest through the trees, whichever way that saying actually goes? Because it's getting a bit clogged, I think the proper pronunciation is. It's the same with biases you've already mentioned. Nudge doesn't even cover all the biases, but then don't we have currently like 150 or more biases? Like, does this actually serve any purpose? Especially when, for academics, it actively pays to come up with a bias, because a new bias is a higher chance of publication, novelty effect and all that. But from a practitioning side, is there any value to this? Is there any really additional merits to bias 206?
There absolutely is. And this is where I'm going to get hate mail from all the academics. Well, okay, not all that. Let's say majority of the academics. And so we have the replication crisis in behavioral science. I'm going to say that's a bunch of BS.
Nice plug for Nick Hobson's podcast.
And the reason why I say that is because consumer decision making rapidly changes. If we look at, we'll say, an academic life cycle 5 years ago or 6 years ago, that research is probably not so relevant. But then we're mad. As academics, we are angry that studies can't be replicated anymore. Well, if consumer decision making is actively evolving, then the science should not replicate 5, 6, 10, 15 years later. So we're looking at those practitioners' books. That's 15 years old. It's irrelevant science. So still using nudge is still relevant. However, the results of the studies might change. The results of the studies that founded nudging or that are discovering shoving now will likely have changed or will change in the future. And that's okay. That means we're evolving as science. If a science does not change, then why are we here? We should all just quit our jobs and go away. And academia doesn't matter because it's all been studied already. So again, that's... if studies are continuously being replicated and even though consumer decision making is rapidly changing, our choices change, the environments we make decisions in change, then something's not matching up. I think it's often maybe academics are sometimes a little defensive in their work not being relevant anymore.
I mean, yes, academics are definitely defensive, but you've done a PhD yourself. You know, if after you've done a presentation and the question round comes around, how some people might approach your topic, your research, and if it gets too personal, even there's a reason why people are defensive, because if you get approached in a hostile manner, it's probably the best way to be. But so you've mentioned that consumer decision-making and the environment in which they make decisions is very, very rapidly changing. But what is the main contributor to that, do you think?
It's how we make decisions, the environments we're in. So if we look back and say, let's do a willingness to pay study in behavioral economics or consumer behavior 15 years ago on the internet. Okay, well, you do the similar study today, it's likely going to be different because the internet is structured differently. Websites are structured differently. So the variables are different. So although it's still used on the internet 15 years ago to today, that's a significant amount of time. 15 years ago, there wasn't an iPhone around. So the way we engaged with the internet was mostly on a desktop or a laptop. Was not traditionally used in a mobile device. And if it was, the interface was not the same as it is today. So absolutely, the price you're willing to pay for X widget or Y product is likely to change over 15 years. And 15 years from today, more than likely, the internet's going to look different. Live experiences are going to look a little different. And, just the way we buy things changes. So even going back 15 years, we had credit card, debit cards, cash, check. Now today you have still all the same, but check is a little less frequently used. And then
let's just ignore check. I can promise you can essentially ignore it. I've done the research.
And then, but today we also have, wireless transactions or using your
PayPal, Klarna, the whole shenanigans. Yep.
And what's that going to look like in 20 years? So the way we engaged is going to change again. And so if we're applying insights or the results of studies from 20 years ago, then that client's probably going to have 20-year-old results.
So if I can just clarify, because I think what you said is really interesting. So the idea is that we know that context matters to how people make decisions, but is your argument that our own personal and social contexts are constantly evolving, that it's not, you can't necessarily expect to replicate a study done today that an effect was found 10 years ago because the contexts were so different? So is that correct me if I'm wrong, if I've got the wrong end of the stick, but is that sort of what you're getting at with this replicability point?
Absolutely. That's a great analogy.
Okay, okay, you can take that one.
I'm worried. But I'm a bit worried about, because I obviously, if you do anything, like if you do anything online now, the fact that wouldn't replicate, from say 10, 15 years ago, I'll take that. I mean, what we do on the laptop now, what we do with our phones now, it's completely different, and probably in the next 10, 15 years it will evolve once again, which makes me very anxious when I think about all the developments I have to go through as I become older and older. It's a slightly more existential issue that I should face on my own and not on this podcast. But there are things such as... for example, like a lot of priming studies. Now, I have to admit, I'm not a massive proponent of priming, but there were a couple of really famous or like iconic, if you will, studies, such as that, if people were like subliminally primed with words that were associated with old people, that they walked to an elevator slower. Like, first of all, it's kind of ridiculous that someone was asking these questions to begin with, but they had the result, and I don't think that study that just didn't replicate, but hasn't been accused of p-hacking, which is unfortunate. But what really has changed in context that would no longer replicate? Because I get the online stuff, I get everything where technology is involved, but the same doesn't really go for this type of stuff, right? Right?
I would say it does, and here's why. Let's take that old person for example, and let's say a word that an old person in business doesn't like is the word deal. More than likely, that person has experienced a good deal in their life, and it probably wasn't a good deal. So the word deal, keeps us away. It primes us to say, I'm going to be a little skittish and probably get away from this opportunity. Another bad word, opportunity as well. So what happens is now that person wasn't born with the idea that, deal is bad. They gained it through life experience. So let's say that person is now between the ages of 55 and 65. But they came across that lived experience between the ages of 30 and 55, but now it's more relevant. And then, say the next generation might come across different message framing that's, not appropriate to them and they don't like, and they might walk away from it at a later age. And that's how we get to this whole politically correct disaster. So words we use today were not appropriate 20 years ago, and those we used 20 years ago were not appropriate 20 years before that. And the words we use today will probably not be appropriate 20 years from now.
Probably.
Yeah. I mean, I do have to say, I think, Merle, with that example, there's probably another element at play in terms of just poor experimental control and communication about the setup of the experiment. And you can't replicate it if you don't know how they did it and who else was in the room and things like that. Things that experimentally there is poor control and so poor replicability. But
I picked a very poor example on purpose. Don't worry.
Okay.
I just wanted to check something.
Yeah, I feel because I'm trying to be an independent interviewer, but I myself I'm an experimental economist, so doing lots of in the lab studies, and we all talk about internal locus of control. Not now, but internal validity as opposed to external validity. So I don't know whether this is going to get too technical, but Mike, would you say that what your viewpoint counts for field experiments in terms of the replicability crisis, or field and lab experiments?
I'd say both.
Both.
I have different opinions on both, and so I believe that self-reported studies are great pilot studies. They're great to identify: are these the best possible hypotheses? Are these the best possible variables to proceed forward with? And then let the field experiment, fill in the gaps. Self-report studies. There's some pros, there's cons. I think there's more cons. But capturing consumer behavior in the field when they're engaging in real time with a specific brand, that's probably some of the best data we can get. But if we base most of our business decisions on self-reported data, it can get a little challenging depending on how the research design was crafted and the instrumentation.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Very
Thanks
fair.
for speaking on
Both lab and field studies, thank you. Not a complete rejection, so that's good. So I want to come back to something that you've mentioned earlier, that if you are working with your client, one of the first questions from the research perspective, but also from what they want, is where are we now and where do we want to get to? What do we actually want to achieve? On a larger scale, how do you see that for Clicksuasion and then Clicksuasion's role within behavioral science and the development of behavioral science? Nice and broad question.
That's a good question. And so going back to that analogy I gave earlier with the closed loop for physicians in life sciences, we want to close that loop. We want to avoid having two separate life cycles, one for the academic who's in publish or perish environment, and those for the practitioners who are getting the research 15 years too late. Because if we were to say, hey, client, this is what we found, this is how you can apply it, and this is what you can expect or hope for some objectives over the next year. If we were to show some p-values, they're never going to touch it. They don't know what it means. More than likely, they're going to ignore it and put it on a shelf somewhere else. But if we break it down in kind of like a bedside manner, in a digestible format, like your practitioner would. More than likely, your physician or your family doctor is not going to tell you what's wrong with you in medical terms. They're going to tell you something that you can digest. And so we are doing that same application for our clients. And then we're closing the gap between academics publishing just for the sake of publishing, and then practitioners reading old research that is potentially no more valid and reliable. So closing the gap is our objective here at the lab.
And how do you do that? Because I'm pretty sure people have been hoping for this for decades.
Well, it's difficult to do it at scale because, what does scale look like in management consulting and research? It's difficult. Although we are actively collecting data, we're actively publishing both on our website with our clients and in peer-reviewed journals. Our goals to close that gap, or our journey to close that gap, is somewhat slow. It's methodical. It's one client at a time. And if we were to give that framework to everyone, then potentially we'd be out of business as well because everybody would replicate it. So pros and cons there as well.
That's fair enough. How often do you find that your clients come to you with a really good understanding of the problem that they want to solve and where they want to get to? Or is that something that evolves and you sort of learn together, like during the process of working with them?
I would say both. I would say most come to us with a decent understanding of what the challenge is and how they want to get there, or at least what the desired outcome is for working together. Because most people don't wake up in the morning and say, "Ooh, I want to hire a consultant today." It's just not how this works at all. Like, "Well, I'm going to hire an academic." Like, it's not how this works in life. So trust, having, building good relationships, having trust with clients or potential clients, that's what really brings people in. And they say they trust you, they'll contact us and say, "Hey, Mike, Katana, Anna, Katie, Sarah, what can you do? How can you help us in this challenge?" Where most clients actually don't understand is how much data they're sitting on. So when we say, and this could be for a company that's the size of 2 people or has 200,000 employees, the question is typically, "We would love to see some of your data from these softwares or processes." And the response is most likely, "We don't have data." Because when we say data, they're thinking the movie The Matrix with binary ones and zeros flying in front of their face. And so more than likely, clients are sitting on the data to answer their challenges. We would analyze their data, so secondary research, and then dive into any primary research if there's any gaps that need to be filled. So most people are sitting on the answers, at least in data form, for what their challenges are. But they sometimes don't know how to apply that or what it means. And so identifying what that data means, how it applies to their goals, how can you measure it for success, and then as well as, share it in a digestible format. So, you don't have to be a behavioral scientist to understand and apply it.
All right.
Nice. And are there any common problems or common reasons why people come to you? I know you sort of said during the pandemic, there's been one overarching sort of thing that people ask you for advice about. But outside of the pandemic, what are are there any sort of common ones that you sort of roll your eyes at this again?
Common are digital consumer journeys, how to keep consumers or clients engaged in a digital funnel, how to keep them engaged with a brand. What does the website journey look like? What are the drop-off rates, the conversion rates, and how does it align with measurable objectives? So really digital journeys, along with websites or third-party sites as well, how to keep the client or customer engaged with the brand. It's one of the most common ones we are requested for, beyond what we talked about during the pandemic.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm wondering if this is a very naive question, because I know the answer to this is going to be yes, but I want to know... Very good. You haven't even heard the question yet. So my main question is, but I will specify it, is like the customer journey or brand loyalty, engagement with the brand is obviously, I'm saying obviously, it's an assumption, quite different from being offline in real life versus online, which is obviously your forte. But what is essentially the biggest difference, assuming that there is a massive difference?
Is tangibility. Is a customer or consumer is likely to engage with a product or service, or more likely to buy a product or service once they can touch it, smell it, taste it, hear it, hug it, lick it. I mean, if there's any kind of human to product, human to human, not for everyone. What if it's ice cream? Then you want to lick some ice cream. So
sure, fair play. You got me there. I'll shut up. It's all right.
So if you go to, going forward, building hybrid experiences where you can combine the digital experience with the in-person or tangible experience are important, because if you go to an Apple store and you look at, say, you walk around that brown table that has the MacBook Pros on it, the MacBook Pros, the MacBook Airs are more than likely angled. The screens are angled at a 76-degree angle, which is just the right angle where you could see what's on the screen, you could see the graphics and the colors, but you can't read.
I did not know this. I had no clue that was that specific. That's great to know. Thanks for letting me know.
So if you can't read what's on it, you want to move the screen. So if you want to move the screen, you take your two thumbs, push on the screen, and lean it back. Now, what have you done? You've now touched the product. Apple knows, and us as behavioral scientists know, that a consumer is not so likely to purchase a $1,200 item if they have not touched it. Therefore, if you nudge the customer to touch the item, then they're more likely to buy it.
So how does this work online?
Yeah, you have like less senses activated in the decision-making process. Does that make things simpler or more difficult for you?
More difficult, but there are ways to make digital experiences tangible, to make a website feel like you're there in person or you're engaging with it with more than one sense. This is where the neuroscience constructs come in play. So if you can engage with the customer based upon, how their potential ECG results are going to be, or the human eye tracking, their heart rate, et cetera. So, or their facial expression analysis. These are the neuroscience constructs that keep us engaged. And so we're not saying like, wow, I can touch that website, but your mind saying I've touched that website.
Interesting. Your mind says you've touched the website. I'm just digesting it. Okay.
How about you digest that? I have a question that is actually with regards to the pandemic. So from both the brand and the consumer's perspective, there seems to be that obviously if touch and if tangibility is the main thing where you're like, that is the main difference, but this is also a main factor that actually leads to the sale or for the engagement from the customer to the brand. Given the fact that almost everything is moving online and people are predicting that this will actually persist after the pandemic, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it depends on who you ask. Some people will say it's a bad thing.
I'm asking you.
Again, I'm going to go with the generic answer. It depends, and I say that for a couple of reasons. Because at the end of the day, the brand wants your loyalty. The brand wants you to purchase whatever they're selling. You also, the consumer, when I say you, the consumer wants to have a positive experience with a trusted brand that they know, like, and trust. The consumer might also have two different decision processes. One is, I can spend this money and be happy, or I can spend this money in savings and retire maybe a few days earlier. But then if you look at it, how stocks work, if you invest in that company, if they're say in the S&P 500, you're also simultaneously contributing to your retirement if you have a 401k. So depending on the person, how they spend their money, how they engage with brands does make a difference. It does matter. And also changes on who you ask. Well, it's a very difficult question to answer because every person has a different decision-making process when it comes down to what that means to them. But when looking at the tangibility of websites, it's also perceived tangibility, because sometimes tangibility has a negative effect in consumer decision-making. So let's say you're on your cell phone and you're scrolling down your favorite social media platform. You come across the video. If the video plays automatically, more than likely you're going to at least stop, watch it for 4 seconds or so, and then say, okay, is this something I want to continue to watch? If so, stay. If not, scroll up. So all you do is scroll, the video started playing, and then you didn't touch, okay? Now, in the opposite scenario, let's say you're scrolling, the video doesn't play automatically, and then you have that little triangle play button in there. And if you're doing this, so if you're scrolling, and I know we're on audio only for the podcast, so I'm holding my cell phone in my hand. I have my scrolling forefinger about a quarter of an inch from the screen. And as I'm scrolling, that little triangle play button appears, but I don't move my finger a quarter of an inch. That is too much. That is a physical barrier for a consumer. That is too much. And we are more than likely to scroll past it than click play. So by adding a tangible aspect to that experience, you're now actually pushing the customer because we have barriers. All these little barriers keep customers away, such as say you've really been wanting to go to this website all day. You're driving home from work, you come across a stop sign or a red light where you know you're going to be there for a few minutes. Then you pull up your phone, you go to,
not allowed
at the red light. But it may not be allowed, but this is how consumers engage. And so they pull up, www.blablabla.com. And then the little blue line, I'm not sure it's really a website. I'm just making that.
It might exist.
Maybe. We'll check it out after this podcast. And the little blue line
if it exists, it will be linked below.
And then you have the little blue line that pops up, but it doesn't go anywhere. 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000. 4 seconds pass. What are we likely to do as consumers? We're likely to bounce and go somewhere else. 4 seconds.
I mean, the light's probably green by this stage.
So 4 seconds have passed, and that's too long for a customer to wait for a website to load. We've already lost their attention, and they're gone. So
we literally have no attention span, do we?
No, absolutely not. We want things yesterday and be perfect. Think about how when you look at reviews on the internet. So if you're on Amazon and you see a product has a 4.5 review, you're like, all right, it's pretty good, 4.5. Yet the average is 4.6. So 4.5 is technically a below average product. But then we go to the reviews, the qualitative reviews, and we look for, let's go right to the 1 stars and see what people had to say about this product. And it's like, we see the qualitative reviews and they are, love the product. I love this item. However, I would have gave it 5 stars if the postal person would have put it on the 2nd step instead of the 3rd step. What does it have to do with the functionality of the product?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
But it affects how consumers make decisions and how we perceive and engage with our products.
But I mean, at least if I read reviews like this, I'm going to be like, yeah, this product seems all right. I might buy this. Poor postal person.
And most people would.
You sort of said that one of the most common things that people would come to you asking for advice about is how to keep up consumer engagement. I imagine like on a web page or through these sort of consumer electronic journeys. And I'm just wondering whether there are some key indicators or psychological levers that you like to pull or test pulling that predict whether or not consumer engagement is high and stays high, or are there key predictors of drop off, like something happens and consumers immediately log off? Are there any sort of these key takeaways or predictors that you could share?
There are. Now, keep in mind, I can give a few. They're not solid, and it's not absolute that they'll always cause this effect because, every consumer has a different decision-making process. So let's say we go back to that example a few moments ago with the play button or the video not automatically playing. That's one that's likely to cause someone to bounce off or bounce away from the desired call to action. Exclamation points are another one. Any exclamation points in text or copy, another way to keep customers away. So looking at the human eye tracking data, exclamation points are not only a physical wall in the sentence to keep it and bounce us away, but it's a visual barrier for our eyes. We see it and we bounce up. So if there's an exclamation point on text, we bounce up towards the page, turn the page on a tangible book, or we are likely to exit out of that browser and go somewhere else as well. So these are some things that keep customers away.
Not the answer I remotely expected.
That's crazy. I'm gonna be like, next time I see an exclamation point, I'm gonna try and be like, what am I doing here? Am I bouncing away? That's really fascinating.
Meta-analysis.
I've never heard that before.
The meta-analysis of the exclamation point.
And can that really make such a big difference, taking away an exclamation point? In your experience, like something as small as that can have big effects sort of on a large scale?
Absolutely. And the reason for that is because most people, all three of us included, are exposed to so many brand impressions daily. I think the last count was around 33,000 brand impressions daily. It's decreased some over the last 12 months in the pandemic, but there's still a lot of brand impressions we see. So just looking around your room, I see like 5 brand names or 6, maybe 10 brand names around me right now on my desk in my field of view. So that's 10 right here. If I leave the lab and go somewhere else for lunch, that's going to see another probably 15, 20. And so it adds up rapidly widely. So as consumers, we don't have the resources to contribute $1 or €1 to every one of these brands we come across, or at least have a brand impression. So when we bounce up, now it's extra capital that company has to inject into customer acquisition or customer loyalty to gain another touch point. So if the average, say, let's talk fashion retail, the average number of touch points for fashion retail are 9 to 13 touch points before a customer's willingness to purchase, a willingness to trust that brand. 9 to 13 touch points is quite expensive over time. And so at the same time, when you're engaged, say your brand's engaging with those touch points, more than likely your competitors or the alternative products have also identified who that customer is, and they're shooting or targeting that person with ads as well. So now they have 9 to 13 touch points from your brand and 9 to 13 touch points from your competitor's brand.
Okay. So this may be a bit late for a clarifying question, but you've used this term throughout the episode, and I don't actually know what it means. What do you mean when you say touch points?
Good question. Anytime a brand or organization becomes in your field of view, becomes in your senses, once you make, say, perceived contact with that brand. So let's say you are really wanted to buy a dress. You shop for this dress online. You say, you know what, not today. So I'm going to not buy this dress. What are you going to see for the next 2 weeks all over the internet? Probably that dress. Every time you see that dress is a touch point. So for fashion retail, 9 to 13 touch points is about the right number of, or average number of touch points before a consumer is willing to say, I trust them, or I'm willing to make a purchase from them.
Wow.
Is this just you've been exposed to this dress so much that now you decide, you know what, fuck it, I'll buy it?
It's wearing down my self-control. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
I don't want to look at it, otherwise I'll buy it. But I see it 13 times and I go, that's fine. Okay.
But then it's also, I would say, let's use that dress as an example. 9 to 13 touch points is different than 9 to 13 times seeing that dress. So let's say, let's just use large brands, for example. Let's say you're going to buy this dress from IKEA. IKEA sells clothes now. If you see that dress 9 to 13 times.
Why don't we just go with H&M? Like, at least they sell clothes.
No, I like it. IKEA's branching out. They need some advice. IKEA's selling clothes.
Please don't tell me this dress is like very like that big shopper bag IKEA gives you, like blue, yellow, both just awful colors.
I'd buy it.
No, you wouldn't.
Sorry, Mike, carry on.
You're good. I'm picturing what a blue and yellow IKEA branded dress would look like. I think there's a fashion line out of this, and you can eat some Swedish meatballs as you wear this dress. So 9 to 13 times seeing the dress is different than 9 to 13 times seeing the brand. If you were to see IKEA 9 to 13 times, you're likely to build some trust. But if you see the dress 9 to 13 times, you're more likely to be cognitively taxed and overloaded, so you're less likely to buy it. So when retargeting a consumer based upon a specific item, let's say in fashion retail, 4 to 6 is the magic number for retargeting for the specific product. The other touch points are relevant to the brand.
Okay, so just throwing Swedish meatballs at them and maybe a calyx here and there, but not the dress.
No, not always the dress.
Well, IKEA here, if someone from IKEA is listening, please do branch out into fashion. You know how to market it.
Yes, we're happy to have you as a sponsor on the podcast, IKEA clothing range.
Yes, please come.
Okay. As we're sort of approaching the end of our conversation, we always sort of have a couple of questions we like to finish on. First of all, to ask you, you are currently working in the field, you're watching it evolve, you've seen it evolve, over the past 10, well, I don't know how long it's been since you were 13. I don't want to guess. So what's next from your perspective, what's coming next over the hill? Is there anything you're particularly excited about, the direction that we're going, or any sort of direction you think we should be going as a field?
As a field, I think more field experiments, more applied science. Let's get away from the publish or perish environment and start applying behavioral science where applicable and where possible. For the lab, we have a big announcement coming soon. And then for myself, over the remaining years of my life, I'd like to move into consumer advocacy and advocate for consumer rights when engaging with large brands.
All right.
Wow. I feel like we could do a whole podcast about consumer advocacy. That sounds fascinating. So I know we don't have enough time to go into that today, but I'm going to put a pin in it. And I might ask you some follow-up questions later. But until then, the consumer of this podcast has stayed with us for about an hour now. So that's pretty good for consumer engagement. So where would you like to take them next? Where can they find out more about what you're doing and your work with Clicksuasion Labs?
I'll give 3 locations. Number 1, you can go to clicksuasion.com. That's CLICKSUASION.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/M as in Michael, Barbera, USA, as in United States of America. And then... Got to clarify that just to make sense. And then lastly, my email, feel free to email mike@clicksuasion.com. I promise I will respond to every email that I get. I can't promise to be within the hour, but I promise to respond.
Wow. Big claims.
Yeah, time to spam. Time to spam. No, but okay. As promised, as always, everything will be linked down below, including your email address, which you shouldn't give out your email address so freely to strangers, Mike. This is not very smart. But Mike, thank you so much for making the time. I thought it was a great conversation. I just like Sarah, I'm putting a pin in the consumer advocacy topic. We are about to finish recording for season 2, so you'll probably be invited back for season 3 because it sounds incredibly interesting, especially from a behavioral science perspective. But Mike, as to close, thank you so much for making the time.
The pleasure's all mine.
Thanks for coming on. Okay, so that was us talking to Michael. As always, Michael, thank you so much for making the time. I thought it was a great conversation. I want to start on, I think, the most controversial thing that was said. Because I partially, I'm like, yeah, it does make sense to me, but I mean, partially. So, Sarah, what's your opinion on the fact that we had a replication crisis is just not that important? Just kind of, did we ever expect anything to replicate anyway?
So on hearing this the first time, I had a bit of a visceral reaction, which I've sort of, it's sort of like my whole body went a bit like, what? Just because it almost feels like science sacrilege to say that. But I've sort of reflected on it and, sort of questioned myself, like, why did I have such a visceral reaction? I don't know the answer.
Okay.
But I mean, so I think if I've understood correctly, Michael's point was, yeah, sure, we have a replication crisis, but it's not as important as people make it out to be. It's not as world ending. We shouldn't have to stop applying sort of behavioral science insights because they don't replicate. And okay, on one hand, of course, a perfect replication is never, ever going to exist, right? In order to perfectly replicate a study, you would need a time machine to go back in time to the day the study was run, using the same experimenters, the same weather outside, the same words and tone of voice and accent of the person reading out the instructions in order to have a perfect replication.
Sure.
So we know that that's not possible. But, all good scientific theories are falsifiable, right? By definition, right? A good scientific theory.
This is very
good.
Popper Lakatosh kind of.
Yes. Well, yes. If you subscribe to this, a good theory is something that can be disproved, can be proven wrong. A bad theory is one that can be never ever disproved. Like, for example, that
Karl Popper is very happy with the fact that he's still like super relevant for behavioral science.
Yeah, he's relevant. For example, like discussions about religion and the existence of God. It's very hard to prove or disprove. You can bring lots of arguments to the table, but ultimately it's not something that's disprovable.
Sure.
I don't know, falsifiable. But I think what is important is that the results that we get from studies are not artifacts of context or being driven by unknown mechanisms, right? That we don't attribute results to the wrong thing.
Sure.
And in science, that's why replication is so important, because we've seen the damage that can be done when a badly run study gets published and makes headline news. For example, vaccines linked to autism. And we also know the way that people develop their beliefs, right? They look at some information, they sort of bring that into their sort of mental mold. They decide whether or not it's believable. If it's published in a scientific journal and everyone's talking about it, kind of believable. And you sort of say, okay, well, this is true. But once you hold a belief, it's very, very difficult to get people to change their mind. So that's why it's so important that when we talk about the behavioral science insights, that we have, some degree of certainty that, the links that we have found, that X causing Y, that is actually what's going on. Because it is very dangerous to peddle science that is not true within that sort of scientific wolf's clothing. And it's even more dangerous when you're peddling it thinking it's true, because it hasn't been, because you haven't done the replications, you haven't had other people say, okay, well, if this is true, then maybe it should also apply here. I think there's a difference between saying that, context is king, and we should never expect really to find, maybe something happens in the lab context that doesn't happen in the field. And that's to do with the environment that the lab experiments are set up, or the way that people can't see each other or can see each other. Right? All of these things that are tightly controlled that wouldn't be tightly controlled in the field. Okay, maybe it's not generalizable what we find there. But there's a difference between saying that there's no space for replication and saying that context is a really big deal and is going to change causation and is going to change whether or not insights are applicable across different contexts. Is my soapbox, which I'm now I'm passing the torch.
I mean, you got heated on that one. I mean, we should probably emphasize, by no means do we think, or is Michael saying that, there is no place for replication. He's just really clearly emphasized that what we're dealing with is a context which is very strong, and in his field specifically. So we do have to mention that, I mean, if you don't know Clicksuasion as a company, they are essentially, all their stuff is online. They focus on the online environment, which is why it's called Clicksuasion. I mean, there's not much clicking going on when I walk through a city. Not that I've done that recently, but whatever. And so their stuff is entirely online. And from his perspective, I very much understand the idea that, replication is all good and well, but given how long it takes to conduct these studies, especially academically, like you see one study which has been published, which for a fact that's gonna be, so assume it's been published in 2019, then probably the study was conducted 2017. If you then read it in 2019 and you want to set up your own study, likely this is only going to happen in 2020. So then you've run it, and then maybe later you can publish it, and then it's 2021 or more likely 2022. This is assuming non-economic journals, because otherwise it's going to take even longer. So let's assume we're dealing with marketing here, because that is Clicksuasion's space of operation. What you're now seeing is that we had a replication which has been done at least 2 to 3 years later, and then has been published, even further ahead. As Michael has already mentioned, like the research that most marketeers are currently working with is old. It's too old, especially because 2 years in the consumer tech space is an eternity. Like, I mean, keep in mind, for example, it's also going to age the episode, but only Clubhouse, as an app has been recently released. It's already massively overhauling what can be done in digital marketing. And that's currently, as we are recording this episode, only available for iPhone, and it's already made massive waves. And people are literally considering whether they are going to buy an iPhone to be able to join the app. I've read the articles. This is a genuine debate.
Wow,
should I buy an iPhone just for Clubhouse? And I'm like, I don't know, Queen, do you have 1,200 euros just casually floating by? Is that your life? Because if that is your life, I mean, live it. do what you need to do. But So I do get his concern there. But in that case, what also concerns me is to what extent can academic work even remotely contribute to what's going on in this space? Because the digital space is very, very fast. And academia, not always, but like 99% of the time, is just so slow. Like, it's too slow. And they know that. They've known that for eons. But these are things we should really, really, concern ourselves with. And in that case, if you're in a field, there we go. That took too long. So if you're in a field which, every year is a complete overhaul, well, maybe not a complete overhaul, but like a reset maybe of the system, or just brings about changes which are so impactful on the context, are you then really worried about the replication crisis that might be going on in academia, given that you can barely rely on academia as a source of information anyway, because it's too slow? And from that perspective, I'm like, yeah, I guess you wouldn't be that concerned about the replication crisis, because you only looked at it with half an eye to begin with. Because academia can't keep up. Right.
Yeah, I think you make a really, really good point. Completely see that.
Thank you.
Well done. Well done. I love it. Right.
I think we should end on that. I think this is the smartest thing I've said in a long time. So let's take my victory and move with it.
Excellent. So thank you guys very much for listening to this episode. Thank you, Michael, for being a wonderful guest and for spending an hour of your life with us. We really appreciate it. We hope you found it interesting, thought-provoking, or at least it helped you pass an hour of your day. And as always, everything will be linked below. So go check out Michael on LinkedIn and Clicksuasion. And until next week, hopefully you'll hear us again soon. Bye.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denied.